As I just said, welcome to the Withamsville Church of Christ Sunday morning class. Glad that you've weathered the wet conditions to be here. We're in a series called God in Creation. We're watching some videos by John Clayton, and the title of his video series is Does God Exist? I'm friends with John Clayton. I've had him out to 3 different churches where I've been to speak. And so when I was at the University of Arizona campus, I had him come out, and we rented an auditorium out on the campus and invited all the college students on campus. And we had a question and answer session. The president of the Atheist Club came out there and asked John Clayton some questions, which was really interesting. And then one day we had a Muslim who was sort of offended that he was doing this series, and he asked him some questions. And he answered that really well. He said, well, sir, I'm not attacking your faith, but I'm telling you why I believe in mine. If you want to hold a series of lectures and tell why you believe in yours, you're welcome to do that. And so he handled it very tactfully. But then I had him out to Irving, Texas at South MacArthur Church of Christ. And then I had him out to Muskogee, Oklahoma when I was the preacher there, and we rented an auditorium. He likes to go out in the community rather than to a church. That's his preference if you're trying to reach the lost. And so I called him about 3 weeks ago because I wanted to talk to him. And I had to remind him who I was. And it's been a while since I've talked to him. But when I reminded him about the University of Arizona, he said, I remember that one. And but anyhow, I used his videos extensively on the campus because the college students had their faith challenged in their courses. And they were being challenged as to the veracity of the Bible. They were being challenged about whether or not the whole story of creation was even tenable. And so I used it and used videos oftentimes, and it was a very evangelistic ministry. I would start with some of his videos, not all of them. I'd pick some. So right now, if you remember from last week, our introduction, this isn't a Bible study for John. What he's doing is talking about science and whether or not there is a God, and whether or not from what's been created you can believe there's a God. And in Romans chapter 1 and verse 19 and 20, it says this: what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So what Paul teaches here in Romans, and it's what I believe, that when you look at the universe, if you had nothing else, if you didn't even have a Bible, and you just looked at universe and reflected on what you could learn from it, you would know that there's a God. And that's sort of the approach that John takes. And I've heard him say this many times, that if science, which is what we can observe and see, contradicts theology, you either have bad science, which means you're going beyond what you can see and observe and you're making speculations, or you have bad theology and you're trying to make theology match your view of science. But since God created this world, you can't have a conflict between the Bible and science. Either you have bad science or bad theology. And so you always have to look at that you're compatible. So last week was just an introduction that Barry gave. This week we're going to be talking about the beginning of the cosmos. Next week, Barry will be leading the discussion, the cause of the beginning. Then we'll have 2 lessons on design and creation and how you can see the design of a creator and creation. Those are really cool. And then the last thing, we're going to talk about the timing of creation and what do you believe and what are the options on that. So sit back and enjoy. This first clip is a short one. Then we're going to have about a 15, 17-minute clip.
Assuming reality here. We're talking about things that are fundamentally scientific. That means, remember our definition from the first program, they can be verified experimentally, they can be falsified, they can be observed, they can be experimentally dealt with in some way or another. We're dealing with reality. You exist. Now, if you admit that you exist, The first major question that we want to talk about is, did that existence have a beginning? In the previous program, I talked about Stephen Hawking and his suggestion that you could avoid the question of God's creation by assuming that something can come from nothing without really defining what you mean by nothing. And we talked about the question of dimensions. I mean, in bosonic theory, there are 26 spatial dimensions. In string theory, there's 11 spatial dimensions. I'm talking about X, Y, Z, and time. The beginning. If we come to a discussion of our own existence, I suggest to you that's the framework we have to deal with. Quantum mechanics deals with the very, very small. What is it that makes up electric charge? What is it that makes up quarks? What is it that allows us to have measurements and experimentation on the structure of the fundamental building blocks, protons, electrons, neutrinos, and so forth? Our discussion deals with us, the physical world in which we live. The question of whether there was a beginning, not the beginning of whatever might have been responsible for the process of producing time and space and so forth, but the beginning of the universe as we can observe it, as we can experiment with it, as we can logically examine it. Was there a beginning, or was there no beginning? Now here's a statement, and it actually came originally back some 50 years ago from a humanist organization that states one view. I would suggest it is a very safe atheist view. The universe is eternal, self-existing, and not created. Okay, eternal. That means that there was no beginning. In one sense or another, everything that we are made of, all of space, all of time, all of matter energy, has always been. It just gets recycled in some way or another, that it had never had a start. Self-existing means that there was no cause. Now, the reason I say that this is a very safe atheist position is because if you assume the universe is eternal, then you don't have to deal with the question of a beginning. If you assume there was no beginning, or if you accept the proposition that there was no beginning, then you don't have to deal with cause. The problem with dealing with cause is that if you admit there was a cause, you have to explain what that cause was. What was the causer? Now, in reality, string theory and brain theory and some of these concepts that we hear kicked around in the new science attempt to answer that question on some kind of a mechanical naturalistic basis. But the simpler way philosophically to avoid the issue is to simply deny that there was a beginning. Now, there is another position which is true of many religious structures. I will give you the quote you've heard the most often, and that is a quote from the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And you'll notice that in this chart, we have the 5 words that make up the Genesis account. Reshith, Elohim, Bara, Shakim, Eretz. And we have how they would have been understood by the people of the time. And on the right-hand side, we have the number of times that word is used in the Bible. Now, once again, I use the Bible here not to prove anything, but to simply demonstrate a juxtaposition. Reshith literally means something for which there was nothing before. Reshith Elohim. Elohim indicates a cause. Now, if you were to read other religious manuscripts, you might get a different view. Carl Sagan, in his Cosmos program, went back to Hindu manuscripts talking about recycling or reincarnation. And that was interesting. At the time in which he wrote that, there was some scientific support for that idea. But our question here is, what is the scientific evidence as we understand it today? Was there a beginning or was there no beginning? Assuming reality here. We're talking about things that are reality. Assuming
Hit
reality.
clear all.
We're talking about things that
You have to hit it again. Hit
are
clear all.
fundamentally.
Thank you. All right. So, show me reality. So, what makes more sense, honestly, that there was no beginning, that this always was here and recycles itself, or that there was actually a beginning, that someone created created life? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I remember a time in my life when I was attending college and 18 years old, and I walked away from the church. I started playing around with agnosticism, and then I was struggling with why isn't everybody just evil? And so somebody turned me on to this philosophy called logical positivism. And it's the whole idea that it makes logical sense that you're going to treat everybody well and have morals, or we'll kill each other. And so it's a part of self-survival. The nice thing about claiming that I was agnostic is I didn't really have to answer any of these questions. I could say, it doesn't really matter. You can't know. But what I found as I lived my life, that philosophy didn't bring any meaning into my life. It didn't answer some deeper questions I had about purpose, and it didn't give me the tools I needed to handle disappointment and pain in my life. And so my own experience of life caused me to rethink that there had to be more out there. And I started looking at Christian evidences and rethinking about the way I'd been brought up in Christianity. And as I began to do that, I started looking at the world and thought, it makes no sense that this is some sort of accident and that my own experience is the product of just chance. This just doesn't make any sense to me. And so I started digging in. And as I looked at everything, I thought, how could you possibly say that this isn't something that was brought about by design and brought about on purpose? So the next part of the video we're going to see, and there's two of them, I'll go back to back on them, and those are about what happens when you look at the universe. He's going to dig a little deeper into the universe, because the Bible says that when you examine the universe, you will know that there's a God. So we're going to kind of dig into that in this next section. It's two different clips. Lasts about 15 to 17 minutes long.
Start out here by just taking a quick tour of the cosmos and look at some of the things we know, so that we're all on the same page. Now, what I'm going to do here is really copied from Carl Sagan's program Cosmos. And if you remember that program, which has been around for a long time, wonderful program, almost all of us saw it and enjoyed it. He did a thing in which he took us into outer space. And in the spaceship of your imagination, he came towards the Earth and explained to us what we have learned about the universe in which we live. And after he had laid that down, he then laid his personal philosophical ideology on us, which in that case was secular humanism. Now, I want to do the same thing, except I'm going to do it the other direction, just to give us some foundation to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. There was a Burgess publication which was titled Powers of 10. It was actually a book in which each picture was 10 times further away than the previous picture. So I'm sort of copying that idea to try and give you an idea of space and size and distances involved. So we start on the back of our hand in Grant Park in Chicago. We back up 10 times further away and we get this. 10 times further away, we get this. 10 times further away, 10 times further away, 10 times further away, 10 times further away, 10 times further away. And very quickly, we get to a position that nobody watching this series probably has had an opportunity to see. Looking at the Earth from outer space, the Earth is a very different place. A beautiful blue oasis in the blackness of outer space. Something very beautiful. Something very fragile. Something worth taking care of. But as we continue to back away from the earth, we become aware there are other things out there. Continue out of the solar system, and the solar system fades into the background. Something else becomes obvious. We are in a different type of system. And the picture that you see now shows something called a galaxy. Our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. It is one of many galaxies. You're looking at 100 billion stars. Let me give you an idea of how big a number that is. It has been less than 2 billion minutes since the beginning of our calendar, our Gregorian calendar. Less than 2 billion minutes. And there's 100 billion stars in our little galaxy called the Milky Way. You're about a third of the way out in this rotating pinwheel of stars. And as you look at these pictures, you can see the radical nature of our position and the radical size. This particular picture is a 5th grade science book, and that gives you some idea how early kids run into this type of discussion, showing a diagram of our Milky Way galaxy. And you'll notice on that it has a number given of 100,000 light years. 100,000 light years. That's how far light would go in 100,000 years. Has 588 quadrillion miles. Size is just astounding. But as we continue to move out away from the Milky Way galaxy, something else becomes obvious. There are other galaxies. This is a picture of the Andromeda galaxy, our nearest neighbor. And as we move into it, what's interesting to realize is that it's very much like our own galaxy. It's another 100 billion stars rotating around a core. Let me give you an idea how far away that thing is. Let's suppose we send a message to a friend of yours living in that galaxy, the closest major galaxy to the Earth. A radio wave is the fastest thing we know of. A radio wave goes so fast it could orbit the Earth 8 2/10 times in 1 second. We send a radio message to a friend of yours living in that galaxy. They send an answer back to you the instant they guess your message. You'd only have to wait 4 million years to get an answer. The closest major galaxy to us is 2 million light years away. That means it takes 2 million years to get there, 2 million years to get back, traveling at the speed of light. I hope your mind is stretching a little bit here, because look at this next picture. This is a very old picture. It was taken in the 1930s. And there are no stars in this picture. Every spot of light in that picture is another galaxy. Every spot of light contains 100 billion stars, give or take a few hundred million. Every spot of light is 100,000 light years, 588 quadrillion miles in diameter, plus or minus. You know, we thought that was pretty remarkable when that picture was taken. And then in the early 2000s, they had an experiment with the Hubble telescope in which they turned the Hubble telescope out into a part of space they thought was completely empty. Didn't see anything there. Not in our optical telescopes, not in our radio telescopes. They opened up the lens on the camera. They provided the longest exposure they could, expecting to get a totally black picture. Here is what they got. Ladies and gentlemen, those aren't stars, those are galaxies. Whatever your concept of the cosmos is, and if you believe in God, whatever your concept of God is, it just went up by 100 billion. Puts a whole new meaning to Carl Sagan's old phrase, billions of billions of billions. The size of the cosmos, it's absolutely incredible. And any discussion we have about God has to include that, positively or negatively. But there's another point here which comes to the answer of our discussion about whether there was a beginning or not. This is a drawing of galaxies and their motions. Everything is moving outward. Everything is moving away from a central point. If you had 3 galaxies located at positions A, B, and C, And if they were located in that position, you see them today, they'll be in that position tomorrow. They'll be in that position the day after tomorrow. The universe is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, what's one interpretation you can make of this? Well, here's a picture showing one of the interpretations. This is from a textbook showing the Big Bang. The Big Bang. One of the interesting points about the Big Bang is that people have reacted without understanding what the Big Bang is about. Interestingly enough, the word Big Bang, or the phrase Big Bang, was given by Fred Hoyle as sort of a joke, sort of as a criticism of the expanding universe idea and what interpretation might be made of it. But the Big Bang is just a statement of empirical evidence. Let me tell you a little personal story for those of you who are concerned about the Big Bang, and it's just kind of a background thing on me. When I was a kid, one of my favorite activities was blowing stuff up. Now I was no bin Laden or anything, but back in those days, we had a firecracker. It was about that big around, and it was called a cherry bomb. In the service, we called them M80s. It was a pretty powerful firecracker. If you took a cherry bomb and you put it on a Campbell's tomato soup can, you could blow that sucker out of sight. I mean, it was powerful. We used to put them in mud balls. And, you'd light it, you put it in the mud ball, you let the fuse burn down to the edge of the mud ball, and then you throw it. And if you did it right, it would blow up in the air and throw mud all over everything. And for some reason, I thought that was the coolest thing. Well, one day I was out in the garage. We'd just come back from going fishing. We had a bucket of catfish we'd just cleaned. And I looked out in the backyard, and there's my kid brother, and he's in my stuff. And I told my kid brother, stay out of my stuff. And he's in my stuff. So being a kid, I thought, I'll fix him. I'm going to fix a mud bomb full of fish guts. I'm going to fix him for good. Because we had this whole bucket of fish guts, So there was a bunch of mud out there, and I made this gorgeous mud ball. I filled it full of fish entrails, firecracker in the middle. The plan was to throw the thing out the window so it would blow up right over his head and throw fish guts and mud all over him, and he was going to be mad, and Mother was going to get all over him, and this was going to be the greatest thing ever going. So I made the mud ball. I put the fish guts in it. I lit the fuse, got the window open there, got the thing in my hand. I'm going to throw it out the window, and the fuse burned down to the edge of the mud ball, and I threw it out the window so it would blow up right over his head. I missed a window. It hit the pane on the side. It flew over my head and landed in my mother's baby blue Volkswagen convertible. And here is my mother in her favorite car. There was a big bang, followed by a bunch of little bangs on my rear end. And the pattern inside that car looked just like this. So what is the Big Bang? It's a statement of observation. When we measure the temperature of the universe and what it ought to be if something like that happened, it works. When we look at the pattern of stars and the motion of things, it works. The galaxies seem to be moving away in such a way that they came from some incredibly hot primordial source, the Big Bang. Now, let me point something out to you. This has nothing to do with the issue. Someone has said the Big Bang doesn't tell you what banged or who banged it. If you believe in God, this could be a method that God used. Religious people somehow seem to think that this is a huge issue for evolution or something. It has nothing to do with evolution. It has nothing to do with any of the questions that we ask in biology, really, not directly. It's simply a statement of observation. So let's not get sidetracked with issues that are non-issues. And getting upset about the Big Bang or having any kind of feelings that this is somehow an atheist plot or something is simply an irrational approach, an uninformed approach to what the Big Bang concept is about. Okay, we have 3 galaxies located at positions A, B, and C. Let's go backwards in time. If they're here today, then they were here yesterday. And they were here the day before yesterday. And if you keep going back in time, where would they eventually end up? At a Big Bang, at a singularity, at a beginning. Every scientific study we have supports the concept of the expanding universe. And the expanding universe, in all versions of Big Bang cosmology, suggests there was a point of incredibly high temperatures, there was a point of incredibly high density, there was a beginning. Now, back in the old days, there was another view. It was called the oscillating universe theory. The oscillating universe theory was the idea that this is a cyclic process. At the time Carl Sagan did his program on cosmos, this was the rage, and it was even in our books, in our textbooks that we used in the schools. The idea was that when the Big Bang occurred, the universe expanded. As it expanded, gravity eventually slowed it down. It eventually stopped expanding, and then gravity pulled it back, and it happened all over again. So the idea was that we live in an oscillating universe, a universe that expands and contracts and expands and contracts and expands and contracts forever. The problem with that is that in the early 21st century, we discovered something truly amazing and something that is still being studied, still trying to be understood. Because what has happened is we have found out that the universe is not slowing down. The universe is accelerating. The universe is accelerating. We call it dark energy. We talk about the fact that the universe is being pulled apart. It will eventually simply decay into infinite low density. We don't know what's doing it. We have called it dark energy. The real darkness is our understanding. But my point right here is that the oscillating universe theory is no longer an option. Because the universe is accelerating in its expansion. That acceleration seems to be increasing with time. So it's a one-time event. We had a beginning. Now, all I've tried to do here is just to suggest that motions in space suggest a beginning. In our next presentation, we'll look at some other evidences for a beginning and see whether or not there's any indication of cause. Let me say to you again that these presentations are a beginning themselves. What we're trying to do is to get people to look at evidence. And we know that there are going to be questions, there's going to be discussions. We have a website. You can see the address here. You're welcome to look at some of the explanations that we have explained in greater detail there. You are welcome to contact me by email if you have additional questions. But what I hope you do is to go on to program number 3, in which we'll look at more evidence that there was a beginning and start our discussion of what the cause of that beginning might be.
So, a little bit mind-boggling, isn't it? I remember at some point in time, years ago, in my mind, I would think, okay, I'm going to go as far out as I can in space and build a wall. And what's on the other side of that wall? Okay, I'm going to go 10 times that distance and build a wall, and what's on the other side of that wall? And I was just trying to wrap my mind around eternity. And I guess the other thing that sort of kind of blows my mind some is we've been going in, right? Atomic weapons came from going in and going into the cells, and now they're going beyond that. And one of the things that blows my mind, they look for the smallest part of matter that there is, and it turns out it's not matter, it's some sort of vibrating energy. And this vibrating energy is what tells the cell whether it's this or skin or whatever. We're all the same building blocks. And so as I start delving into the universe and creation, it just blows my mind. And of course, his big point here is that this doesn't come from nothing. It wasn't always there. Everything that we know says that this has a beginning. It started somewhere and it's progressing. I remember hearing that all these things were slowing down and were going to collapse on themselves. And the fact it's speeding up, by the way, That's why they say there's dark energy. Energy slows down. It doesn't speed up unless there's additional energy. And so they know something is propelling this outward, and they don't know what it is, so they call it dark energy. And he said, and really what it means is we don't understand what's going on. We don't know. We don't know. But we know that this had to have been created from the beginning, that there had to have been a start to this. Now, here's another thing that sort of blows my mind. So I don't think that as humans we can completely understand this. I think it's beyond our ability to understand. I think the Bible captures it well. It says, in the beginning, God created. Those are the most important things we need to know. But we weren't God's first creation, right? Before us, there were apparently angels. And if God's, since we know God's eternal, if God's eternal, but we'll put it that way, if God's eternal, then how long has he been around? What else has he done? And so I think of, well, where are the angels? I didn't see any in any of those pictures out there. Maybe they're part of the dark energy. I don't know. And there's dark matter. They know now because of gravitational effects on the rest of the universe that there's matter out there that is dark and they can't see it, but they know it's there because they see gravitational effects on the universe. And so there are possibly worlds out there we can't even see. And we're in this little piece of time here. We know nothing. But so one of the things that's interesting to me is sometimes the arrogance humans have to think they can understand everything they need to understand about our universe and our world. Our ability to see, they say, and I mentioned this in a sermon a while back, that dark matter and dark energy comprises, do y'all remember what percentage? 95%. What we see is 5% of what they believe that is out there. They have evidence that 95% of the dark, of energy and matter is dark and we can't see it. Well, we are smart enough to figure out that we're 5%, maybe. And so when I think about all that, I can't wrap my mind around any sort of philosophy that this happened by accident. I can't wrap my mind around that this is some sort of freak of nature. It just doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is that we are a product of intention and creation and design. And even when you look at the universe, and he doesn't make these arguments here, but I've shared some of them recently from sermons, because if you can tell, I kind of get into this. Every time I'm reading my phone, I see a National Geographic article on this. I have to read it and save it, and I have to find a way to work it into a sermon. But I showed a while back a video about math. Everything in our universe is explained that we know of by math, because it's logical. It makes sense. It has mathematical connections to each other, and we've used math to create rockets and to create cell phones. Everything we have that technology has done is a result of our understanding of math, and this entire universe is an understanding of math, which reflects that the person behind this is logical and built these things with design and purpose. And that's why things don't run into each other. That's why we can be in this fragile little earth in just the right place. A little closer to the sun, we'd burn up. A little further away, we would freeze. I mean, just the right place in the universe for us to be able to have the type of life that we have. So this is something that all we're talking about right now is that there had to be a beginning. And so I know most of you believe that, but I think it's important to remind ourselves that the faith we have, that there was a God that created this, is the most reasonable viewpoint you could have of how life has originated, of any viewpoint there is. And I always, there's some things that are very simple. And when I get in conversations with people that claim they're agnostic, a lot of times it's an excuse just not to think. Right? Well, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have to be held responsible. I don't want to have to think about why I'm here or where I'm going. And so, but I always like to get them to think, well, where do you think you came from? Do you really believe this was all an accident? Do you really think the universe just kind of spontaneously sort of evolved, generated itself? And because if existence didn't spontaneously happen and everything that we know of, I think, dictates against that, then there's something about the fact that we're here that we ought to consider. And the Bible says what you ought to consider is that there's a God that created you. Now, doesn't it make sense to acknowledge the person that created us, the being that created us, to find out why they created us and what our purpose is? And that is what we're striving at, because we believe as Christians there is no purpose without God. There is no understanding of the meaning of your life, and there's no future for your life without God. But it starts with understanding that we couldn't be here without a creator. There had to have been a beginning. So next week, he's going to talk about what the cause of that beginning was and give some additional evidence for that. And then we're going to spend 2 weeks talking about the design. And he's going to actually look at biology and creation to show you some unbelievable things that to ascribe these sorts of design systems to evolution is ludicrous. And he's going to show you some of those. And then we're going to finish at the end talking about, well, how did it happen and how fast did it happen and what sort of timing and what do you need to believe about that? So thanks for being here today. Look forward to next week. Barry will be facilitating next week. You got just a few minutes early. God bless you.